Well, Rodney,
Here we are again.
here we are again. Isn't this exciting?
Yes,
Yeah,
very.
we're going to do a little fiddling here. I hope that doesn't drive people crazy, but we're still working our way through the technology here. Hello, everybody. I am Chick Morgan, and I am your co-host along with Rodney Bursiel,
Photographer in chief.
and we want to welcome you to Passports and Poets, conversations about the power of place, the places that change us, and why it matters. And I don't know, every week that phrase, that mission gets more relevant to what we're talking about and helping the planet and wonderful things and difficult things that are going on. And today, we don't know where we're going to start. We don't know where this is going to go, but we are just so grateful, I will say, first of all, to have with us Dylan Roberts, who is a professional war correspondent, and we're going to hear a lot about that. And you have such an interesting background. When we first met you, we were talking about a lot of your experiences, and then a month ago, Rodney, Dylan walks in, he goes, I think I'm going to Ukraine,
Yeah.
which we want to hear a lot about. So, Dylan, let's just get started. How does somebody get to be a war correspondent? Is that a conscious choice? Do you fall into it? How did it happen for you?
Yeah, that's probably one of the number one questions that I get.
I bet.
And why do it? But I think you first have to have the mentality of you have to do this kind of job, not even you want to do this. You can want to do a lot of things, but I really think you have to have a mentality of, like, I have to go to these type of places that require, not just trying to get good work, but your life. So it's something you have to do, not something you want to do. That's kind of how I've always approached it. And, I just started kind of in college, saved up money, bought a plane ticket, went to Iraq, and started kind of just from there, and been able to travel to nearly 40 to 50 countries, covered everything from different conflicts in Iraq, Syria, places like Somalia, West Bank, Israel, Gaza, and most recently in natural disasters like Nepal earthquake or hurricanes in Haiti, and most recently went to Poland and Ukraine, and was there for about a month. And yeah, same type of deal. Is you do your research, you do who's available in country you can work with, what stories are important to tell, and you figure that out a lot once you're there, obviously, but you try to do the best you can pre-planning and assess the country and talking to people and reading about it, journalists who are currently there, and when they're not busy, ask them, hey, what's the situation like? How is it reporting? So I love it.
What was your first experience like? You said it was
Well, yeah, you say this is something that you have to do. This is, we need to, the public, I guess, needs to know what's going on, needs to know the truth. What was your first inspiration for you to say this, I'm the person that has to go do this?
Yeah. I mean, I first thought I was going to be into movies. Like, I grew up in Austin and grew up with like the Austin Film Society and going to Robert Rodriguez's film studio, and
We probably crossed paths somewhere at some point.
Right.
And
you can save a dog in Pearl Harbor.
I
wait, that was you, Rodney.
yeah. I had friends that were in Spy Kids 1, while I was like in 5th or 6th grade, and we always made home movies. And then like The Matrix came out during when I was a kid, and like almost every person who's in the film industry at my age, The Matrix was like the reason why you went into movies.
Yeah.
And then when I got into college, they didn't have a film program, but they had a journalism program. And
One second, I'm going to shut the door because the cows are bellowing and the birds are singing too loudly. I'll be right back. Carry on.
I was wondering what we were hearing. I was like, those are cows. Welcome to Texas.
Yeah. In a neighborhood too.
Yeah.
We're hearing cows. Yeah, my wife and I toured this neighborhood before, and we were like, "Whoa, there's cows in this neighborhood."
All right, as you were saying.
Yeah. Moo.
Yeah, and your question one last time, Rodney, so I remember it was about.
Well, it's just you had made the comment that this is something that you have to do. Why did you have the calling for you to?
Yeah, so I thought I was going to be in the movie, and I grew up lucky enough to be in Texas that has, at least in my experience, has a good have a good movie scene and people to talk to, and really friendly. Maybe not like the business side of things like in LA and New York, but at least as far as the education wise and talking to people who are in the industry, absolutely. And then I got introduced to journalism when I was in college because they didn't, and I watched the documentary Restrepo, which is about the U.S. military in Afghanistan in this one area that was a very dangerous mountainous area, and it was filmed by two war journalists, Sebastian Junger and Tim Harrington, and I remember watching that documentary and being like, yes, I want to do that. Like in the beginning, I wanted to do it. And I did my research and talked to a lot of former war correspondents, and including the one that was killed in Ukraine, Brent Renard. And so I still remember the email that I sent to him, and talked to him on the phone, and it's like, hey, I want to get into this kind of stuff. So I talked to a lot of war journalists when I was first starting out, and really good conversations, and they gave me like a really good insight of like, I remember one guy told me, he was like, you need to, when you go out, you have to have to think about, like, imagine yourself without like a limb, just really imagine that. And it's like, because that's the kind of stuff that could possibly happen. So, but I still wanted to do it, and I felt like I had to do it, and it's worked out, for the most part, and I still enjoy, I'm now, after seasons of doing like covering different wars and natural disasters, I feel like I have a pretty good situation of like where the real danger is, understanding the routes, kind of like the producing side, where when I was younger, I did not care. Just jump in the car, let's freaking go, So yeah, and I definitely did that in Ukraine, where because this wasn't like a traditional type of war that we were used, like Iraq and Afghanistan. This was, you're dealing with a top 3 military, and you can't treat it like a normal, conflict. So I don't know. I fell in love with going to those type of places and meeting incredible people, and you see some of the darkest of humans, but you also see some of the most, courageous and wonderful stories that you can imagine. The photos that we see on our end, I can't imagine actually living, because there was I didn't open it. There was something on your page, and it was a kid in the street crying. I don't know if that was some of your footage or what that was, but I was just scanning, and it just, those are the things. I can't imagine these families that are having to evacuate, and they're these women are carrying their cats, and their kids are behind them just in tears, and to see that on TV is hard enough, but to live that, it's just got to be extremely difficult. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you connect with networks, and I'm talking about media networks, or how do you find who to partner with and to get a particular angle in what you're doing?
Yeah, if you're first starting out, like when I first started out, you just email everyone that you can and phone call. You just bother the editors as much as you can and just tell them that, hey, I'm here.
The nuisance strategy.
Yeah.
Very effective.
And maybe they just be like, hey, what do you have? Or, it's like, hey, okay, we'll let you know if we need something.
'Cause you've always been an independent, is that correct?
Yeah. And I've worked with, from New York Times, Al Jazeera to Vice and, not like the very big ones like CNN or Fox, just because they roll out their own crews and, especially during breaking news, like they usually have, 3 or 4 teams there, especially Ukraine. I think like every journalist who I've come across or worked with or looked up to, or like, we're there. Like it was everyone. So, but as far as like capturing footage of stories and women and children, and I always tell people you just got to focus on your job. You kind of have to treat it like kind of as like not like a military mindset, but almost just like get the photo, get what you need to go, and then process that stuff later.
And what do you do with it at the time? Where do you send it? What do you do with it?
Mm-hmm.
You must have a gazillion photographs and hours of film.
Yeah, it just depends. Like I had a few news agencies, ask me, hey, could you just do some correspondent stuff? Just talk about, whether it's like the train station where people are loading up to go to Poland, or humanitarian relief efforts. And so a lot of people are either doing like just taking photos and sending it. But for the most part, especially there, for most people, it was they sign a contract for a month or a week or so, and they try to get as many photos or videos as they can. You saw people doing documentaries. For me, I tried to stay out of working with news companies. Like I've done that, but there was a few that I helped out because, I thought the editors were knew what they were doing, and then the other half for me was just making my own content. So I'm finishing up like a short video, and then I also helped some of my friends who were doing humanitarian stuff. So collecting supplies in Poland and then sending them into Ukraine and raise some money to help buy medical or boots or whatever that needs to be. So, but for the most part, for me, like I was trying to stay completely independent, but I did do some stuff for some news networks.
So walk us through, because you were in the studio with us just a couple of days before you weren't, and we knew that it was a possibility. You got the call. You flew. Well, where did you fly to? What happened? Mm-hmm. Walk us through this month and what that was like, both the logistics and the impact.
Yeah, it's so right now currently you have to, because there's no way of flying into Ukraine. There's probably pretty good chance, never happening for a while. That's all the airports are either destroyed or you'll be shot down, or there's no planes going in general. So other than like military airplanes, and even then, like you didn't ever really see them; you just heard them in the sky. So you had to fly into Poland or Hungary or Romania, any of the border areas. I chose Poland because I had some friends that were working with some Polish guys that had friends in Ukraine, and they were working with each other. They were friends, a Polish guy and Ukrainian guy, and he would collect supplies, and they had a network of buses, like tourist buses, that would also get people. And so when they would get people out of Ukraine and he was going back, they would load up supplies, like those tourist buses that they lift up like the bottom of the cargos, and then they would put supplies in, and then they would go back in Ukraine to get more people, but drop off the stuff and then get distributed where it needs to be. So yeah, I flew into Poland. met up with those guys, but and then started helping my buddy. He started raising money for some funds, and I took some photos and video to help him, keep going. And we knew each other from Iraq, so he's done this kind of stuff before. And then from there, where I was staying was in Lublin, which is about an hour. If there wasn't any, if the checkpoint wasn't so take forever to get crossed into Ukraine, it would probably take you, less than 2 hours to get into Lviv, shorter than that to get into Ukraine. So it's pretty close to the border of Ukraine. And tons of NGOs, tons of humanitarian people on the flying into Warsaw. So you did see a lot of people coming from all over the world.
Was it complicated getting in there? It just
No. No. Poland, as far as you would already, when I flew into Warsaw, you saw some Ukrainian families hanging out in the airport, wondering where to go. And then my buddy sent me a picture of after a week I've already been there, and there was so many Ukrainian people in Warsaw. But they were just coming, when I got there, I think it was almost 1 million. And then the next week it shot up to almost 3 million.
Yeah.
It was crazy amount of people. And so I stayed in Poland for a little bit, helping my friend and learning, talking to the Polish people, because there's a lot of Polish people that, hang out in Ukraine. There's a lot of people who are considered friends, and, there's a lot of cultural similarities.
And that'd never been a problem. They could just come and go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was just open. So, I decided to go in Ukraine, make multiple trips within it, and I went by the humanitarian bus, and I was able to really just see once you get to the checkpoint, you would just see the lines of people, of Ukrainians trying to get into Poland. I mean, miles and miles and miles long, cars that ran out of gas. Just the cars just kept going and going.
Well, and these checkpoints, what are those like? Are they actually checking for credentials or passports, or are they just flowing into the country?
So going in is takes no problem on the Polish side to just check your passport, and then getting into Ukraine, they do take their time of checking who you are and what you're doing, but they're just doing their due diligence. So going in is actually pretty quick, and getting out is way longer. One, you got millions of refugees coming in, so there's different types of lines. That's why I went by bus, because a humanitarian bus, because it seemed a little bit quicker, but you could spend at the checkpoint. There was people especially in the early beginning, there's people staying in line for days, but the average, 4 to 6 hours, you could just be staying at this checkpoint.
Did you ever have an opportunity to talk with any of them? I mean, probably language issues. Well, just Ukrainians in general that were leaving or trying to leave.
Oh yeah, all the time. So they're currently, if you're between the ages, I believe 18 to 60, if you're a male in Ukraine, you cannot leave the country. You have to stay.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Yeah. So it's mostly women and children and elderly. There's some cases I met a Ukrainian guy who has 3 daughters, and I think he explained to me he's the primary caregiver, so he was able to leave. So there's instances like that, but yeah, if you're a male between 18 and 60, you can't leave. You have to fight. And but yeah, you would meet all sorts of people. I mean, Poland definitely has the most refugees. And in that first wave, it seemed like it was a lot of people that had either friends or connections in Europe that they can stay with, or they had the means to get out. And that this last wave that's coming, these are people that don't really have anything. They don't have.
Well, yeah, and when you've got miles of lines and taking days for these people to cross, what are they doing for food and restrooms, and or is that just got to be?
Yeah, it's pretty chaotic. I mean, the Polish and the humanitarian side actually did a really good job of mobilizing. So food, warm water throughout the lines was pretty great, especially once you cross. Like, there was instantly food, water, fire. Like, they built makeshift fires to keep people warm, like shelter. So but it was still chaotic. Like, bathrooms was still an issue. People just going in the woods, and the trains were, a lot of some of the ways for refugees to get out, or for journalists to get into different areas of Ukraine, was by train. So, which is crazy. It's like World War II. And you would see a photo of like people leaving either the capital, Kyiv, or Kherson, which is farther out west. And you would see crowds of people trying to get in the trains. And I saw a photo of a World War II one, very similar, people trying to get out in the mirror, and it looks like exactly the same. Just,
Different clothes.
Yeah. And so Ukraine is such a big country. It's huge. And it became like a very difficult to get around the country, because going by vehicle was very dangerous. Whether it was like different checkpoints, and there was like official checkpoints within country, but they had a lot of like neighborhood type checkpoints, a lot of people with guns, and it became very dangerous to drive. Once you get into a main city, it's fine. But if you start driving to get to different stories or wherever, and if you're not like a humanitarian convoy, or, if it's just you in a car, and that's why it was really dangerous for journalists, because they would try to drive to different stories, and you could run into all sorts of different checkpoints and crossfire, accidental fire, or Russian fire.
But it seems like it would be worse in the cities where they're actually attacking.
Yeah, I mean, it's a different type of danger, so it made it really difficult to travel in Ukraine. Your best bet was going by train, but they would take a long time, and going into places it was fine, and if you had to get a train out, it was very crowded. So it was a very difficult situation. And if you go by train and you're in the city, you don't have a car, and for whatever reason the train could stop, then how are you going to get out? So it was a very logistical, like, I've never had this type of logistical transportation. But I knew people who got in cars and drove around, and had no problems. But that was a big issue for journalists, for sure, was driving in cars outside of the main cities. And that became, so you basically had to, like, especially in Kyiv, you had to like get into the capital either by train or car, stay in the city, and walk to the stories that you're trying to do. So because if you're in the main city and you got in a car and you wanted to go check out this other front line and drive to it, or drive to another story, I mean, there was instances a lot of journalists got hurt doing that. So it's a very difficult country to move around in quickly. So that was one of the things that really stood out to me, is like how difficult, how big Ukraine is. It's very big.
Can you share one of the stories that you worked on, and how you came to choose that particular story?
Yeah, I've been working on one just because I think it would resonate with how friends and family would do in the mix of conflict like this. So there's two best friends. They both own like a surplus, like military store, but not like guns or anything. Like tactical pants and boots, you know, any kind of like military surplus store. And they're best friends. And he lives, one of them's on Polish and the other's Ukrainian. And so when the war started, and he sent his family out of Ukraine to his buddy in Poland, and the Polish guy, Edek is his name, he helped him get found him a house to stay in, and it was his wife, his daughter, his mom, and then his wife's parents. So they had to get out because they had to, the Ukrainian dad had to stay because he's not allowed to leave, and he wanted to stay. He wanted to help. So seeing if I had to send my wife off to somewhere else, and that's a lot. You saw a lot of that, dads and husbands leaving their loved ones behind or sending them off to safety. That was a common thing that you would see all the time. So I saw the family trying to adjust in Poland, constantly on their phone, trying to make, a light of the situation. I would spend dinners and hang out with them and drink vodka all the time, and
Polish vodka is
Yeah.
awesome.
yeah,
I
it's
remember
very good.
that.
Yeah, it's way cleaner, and I
Yeah.
liked it.
I love it. Yeah.
so-
I'm sorry. I should
Yeah.
commentary.
So you would, but you saw, the Ukrainian, his best friend Idek, helping his family get situated, and try to make something normal and try to make them comfortable. And then Yadek is the Ukrainian guy who's Idek's best friend, and his store turned into a logistical office. So they would get in supplies, and they know retail and distribution because that's their business. So it came naturally for them in wartime when they get medical supplies or clothing, because in Ukraine you can't get anything, inside anymore. You have to get everything from the outside. So they were set up naturally of how to get stuff in, because that's their business, is ordering stuff and getting on transports and sending them off. And during wartime, they're getting everything from medicine to clothing to boots, and that's kind of their business now, is trying to be the logistical operation. And that was, so a lot of it was the city of Lviv it's pretty much a logistical distribution place. People sending in there, and then they try to get everything down to the south, to Odessa, or really hard hit areas like Mariupol, which you see in the news. So that's kind of one of the stories, just, seeing the good side of things and the sad side of things of taking your family and taking them to safety. You saw that, and that was a pretty common theme of the men staying and saying goodbye to the loved ones. And women stayed too. There was a lot of I met incredible nurses, Ukrainian women staying and wanted to be either stay and fight, or they needed doctors and nurses.
Yeah, you've been hearing some of those stories about the older women, that 70 and 80 years old, that are standing back and whether if it's just a can of tomato soup they're throwing at them, whatever, they're standing their ground going, this is my home, get out of here.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, there was still a lot of, a lot of people have their own decisions and what they want to do, but yeah, it's scary when you think of a country like Russia, which it's a top 30 military.
But again, this is that thing, how things are portrayed in the media and what you witness, because what you're hearing on the news, you're kind of going, is Russia really the powerhouse that we believe they are? Because it's even the thing, when the guys are going into Chernobyl and kicking up all this radioactive dust, and now they're all sick. How where's the intelligence on that one?
Yeah, what did you hear on the ground? Because you were there for a month.
Mm-hmm.
And, boom, it happened. It started. And then the exodus and all of that, and the enormous change in a month. So what were you hearing about exactly what Rodney was referring to?
So it's pretty obvious Russia definitely miscalculated their capabilities, for sure, and Ukraine's capabilities. And it's a very hard country there's no way they're going to be able to control it if they happen to get more ground. So they definitely, for sure, miscalculated their capabilities. Whether it's using old vehicles, old tactical equipment. My friend said he looked at a Russian soldier's gear, everything, and even his gun, his optics, his lasers, like the features of the gun, his equipment on him, very outdated. So it's almost like the generals of the Russian army lied to Putin, being like, yeah, our military is this strong. Or maybe Putin was just didn't think Ukraine had that capabilities and they could just go in. But I think we're seeing that Russia's military power, if they didn't have nukes, it would, they would not be in the top, 5 or 10 or something like that. And Ukraine, has the motivation, have the will to fight, and they've proved to hold themselves very strong. I also do think, in my opinion, Russia has been very conservative on airstrikes. If they wanted to, they could level any city if they wanted to. But I don't think they want to rebuild. A lot of those cities are important to them. And I think that it wouldn't be any gain for them.
Yeah, that was the other thing I was wondering about. You're coming in to take over this country, but you're destroying the whole thing.
Yeah.
So you take it over, and then you've got to rebuild the whole.
Mm-hmm. And there are
it
doing
doesn't make
that.
any sense.
Yeah, and there are doing that, in places like Mariupol and some of the really close to the borders of Russia. But places like Kyiv, the capital, and Lviv, there's still Kyiv has a lot of destruction, but they could easily just carpet bomb it if they wanted to. They have those capabilities. Maybe not the air power that we still thought they should have, but in my opinion, it seems like they've been pretty. I quote this because yes, they've done awful airstrikes and awful situation, but they can easily increase that more. As far as their ground support, it's still very difficult because one of the main issues for them is they have to stay on the main roads. They can't go off-roading because the territory is either you can't get through forest or there's mud. Just really nature became a problem for them. So they have to be forced staying on the ground on major roads or just roads, and that's such a big target for Ukrainians to hit, whether their own anti-aircraft or drone strikes. So that became a huge problem for Russia.
I remember you were talking about that here when you were leaving a couple of days before you were leaving for there. And what you were telling us, we said, what are you hearing over there from your journalist friends on the ground and that network? And there was still a sense that it was mostly talk and threat, and part of it, you said, was the mud, that there was a certain point that after spring came, it would get too muddy. But everybody was kind of, I really don't think this is going to happen. And then, literally, bang, you were gone a couple days later. Yeah, it didn't happen until it did. So
no, even when I was there, I asked a lot of Ukrainians, even for them, they were surprised that actually happened. You would meet some, it's like, well, what do you think? They're putting so much equipment over, but for most people, they were also really surprised that it happened. They were like, wow, okay. And I think now assessing it, unless Russia decides to just go crazy and just bomb everything and not give, doesn't care about human life, because there's still a lot of civilians in those places. I think they're stuck. I think it's like a stalemate, and they're trying to figure out what's their next plan. So their operation turned out horribly wrong. They're very ill-equipped. Their supply lines are not doing great, whether it's like fuel or getting food to the soldiers. So they have a really big problem, and combined with they don't want to completely destroy some of the major towns there. So that makes it hard. I mean, an instance for compare, I was in the Mosul operation in Iraq, where ISIS held Mosul, and so you had U.S. air power, NATO power, you had Iraqi trained forces trained by the U.S. and a lot of them had U.S. military equipment, so up-to-date equipment, and their resources and their intelligence and their drone capabilities. And Mosul took 6 months to take over. And ISIS had, they had good weapons, but not like Ukrainian type of good weapons where they had javelin missiles, anti-tank, and that still took 6 months to take that city. And you had U.S. airstrikes actually kind of bombing a lot of stuff. I mean, the old city was like completely rebel. So that's otherwise there's very hard to take a urbanized city. If you decide not to do constant airstrikes, taking out targets, and you're just using manpower, it's very hard military-wise. So it doesn't seem like Russia really wants to go full in on just completely bombardment, and then you go in. So that's really the only ways. And Kyiv is such the capital is huge. I think I want to say someone said it's as big as like Chicago. So, yeah, I think it was a major mistake for Russia. And they're going to have to switch up their tactics or what they're going to do. I don't know what they're going to do.
Well, what have you heard of, because over here, you're actually hearing two stories. Mm-hmm. You hear the stories of the Russians that are going, what the hell are we doing? Why are we doing this? But then the next news clip is Putin in a Trump kind of rally, with tens of thousands of people cheering Russia, because they're hearing and believing the propaganda that he's putting out, because that's pretty much all they're allowing out right now. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a lot of journalists, major networks that I know, they're out of Russia. Like Reuters, I've heard, are out. And they're the most kind of like neutral, you could be. But a lot of journalists left Russia. So you're not getting too much information out there. And if you are getting information out there, it's kind of, I think CNN still has they're still doing stories out of there, but it's very like correspondent type stuff. And but I mean, there was a lot of Russians that had connections in Ukraine too, and business people. And Putin's still very smart, even though this is like a major mistake by him. But I think he understands his base. I think he understands his power over his government, and I think it would be insanely hard for him to get out of power, even despite all this. I think he knows that it would be very hard for him to get out of power, whatever that looks like. But I'm sure there's supporters for him, that's, in war, there's always two sides. And I'm not surprised there are.
Yeah, because it's just, there really was no justification for this. And
Other than, I want that.
yeah, I guess I shouldn't even say that, because I'm, this day and age, who knows? But, if we were just to go attack Mexico because we want it,
his reasoning,
would we?
His reasoning was Ukraine not to join NATO, even though Ukraine would never be able to join NATO, and even if they did, it would take another 15 to 20 years to get that passed. So his real reason, definitely, he did not like U.S. military having quote a partnership in Ukraine right next to Russia. He doesn't want any kind of U.S. military association with a border country. So I mean, that's at least for that part, and for sure, has U.S. have interventions with Ukraine? Absolutely, like for sure, and that was probably one of his reasons. But it's still like you didn't see like U.S. tanks and stuff like that. You didn't see, at least I didn't hear about. And another thing is, which it was like the craziest thing, was like he wants to take out all the Nazis in Ukraine. For sure, like there are some very questionable groups and organizations in Ukraine, but it would be the same like the U.S. has KKK. Okay, now let's go invade them because they have some KKK members. You know, it's still not the justification of invading Ukraine just because there's Nazis. And like the whole country is not Nazis. It's, you know, a very small group.
Why is it take so long to get through NATO? I mean,
I'm not really sure. It just probably sounds like someone told me that it just takes a long time.
yeah, I've heard that, but I haven't bothered to research it enough to
I know one of the
understand
reasons why, if the country's in conflict or in strife with another country, then you can't join. So they would have to like resolve all the issues. And Ukraine was never going to be able to join because in the Donbass area where like the Russian separatists in Crimea, that was like an ongoing conflict. So it was never, and now for sure it would, like Ukraine joining NATO, we'll see. I don't know. Like I've never seen such a one-sided where like Russia's really like the lonely country in this. So who knows what NATO might do. So it's a tricky, politics are coming into play, and NATO has to be careful of what Russia could respond to. So we're still a long way of what this end game could be. And I'm hoping NATO and the U.S., you know, really, you know, they're maybe not patient, but they know better than me. But it's, you know, there's U.S. forces on the Polish-Hungary side, and Russia is, you know, that airspace is pretty small, and if you think of scheme of things. So there's a lot of mistakes. I mean, Russia bombed a Ukrainian military base that was like 15 kilometers from the Polish border, and U.S. forces are on that side. I mean, and people make mistakes too. So it's a very tense situation. And there's a lot of things that can go wrong really fast right now.
do you hear anything about the sanctions, the so-called sanctions? Because that gets a lot of play here.
They definitely have hurt them.
How do you see that, experience that?
Well, I just read a report yesterday, though, that they said that I guess the ruble is up now. So they're questioning if the sanctions are even doing anything. Mm-hmm. It's you know, you hear this and you hear this. It's like you don't know what to believe anymore.
It hurts the everyday person in Russia. Like it hurts the whole. I mean, it's hurting people. I don't know if it's going to actually hurt, you know, the Putin and the government, but it's definitely hurting everyday people for sure. But Putin knew like this would come if he were to invade. He counted for it, and I'm sure he calculated, you know, if they were to do all these sanctions, what he could do. So the biggest one is the gas line between Russia and Europe, and I still think that's still operating. But if like Europe were to cut that off, I mean they would be hurting pretty big.
Yeah, because you know countries like in Germany, aren't they literally 100% reliant on
pretty much
Russian oil? Mm-hmm. So yeah, what do you do?
It would hurt Russia in the end, but it's still like I'm sure they would calculate that into play. So yeah, has sanctions have they hurt Russia? For sure. But I think he was calculating, like he was betting on that to happen and had a plan for it. So it's definitely hurting people, but I think he knew he was counting on these sanctions to happen anyway. So
You had mentioned to us before we went on the air that you expect to go back around May. What's about that timing, and do you have any idea what to expect in terms of any changes?
yeah, I think if I were to go back, it would probably be in May, because I just want to see, like, I think right now Russia and Ukraine are at a stall, meaning, like, I don't think Russia is trying to actively take areas right now, and they're having such a hard time taking anything. Like, they're still trying to take Mariupol, and I think they've even tried to stop taking areas of trying to take control of the capital. So I think it's going to be, unfortunately, like this kind of stall kind of issue, unless Russia changed up their tactics. So maybe their tactic is to stall it and have the Ukrainians maybe fight among themselves or try to bring chaos within their country, but I don't think that's going to work. They're all pretty unified. Mm-hmm. So maybe try to crumble the country, into chaos just being there, but I don't think that's going to work. So I think they want to still try to take half of the country that's closest to their border and cut that off, but that's going to be still really difficult for them. So I think they're trying to figure out negotiations with the Ukrainian government, and that's going to take some time. So I think right now it's kind of like a stall right now. And so I think that's going to be for the next month or so, unless Russia really changed their tactics. And if I decide to go back in May, I would like to see if people are going to return back because it's installed in different parts of Ukraine that's quote unquote, safe. How Ukrainians are living in Poland, Romania, and Germany, how they're adapting. What's the humanitarian efforts? Because really there's hardly any major NGOs other than the Red Cross, but UN, Oxfam, they could be there now, but I didn't really see any other than the Red Cross. I'm curious what they're going to do, because right now those organizations are pretty risk avert, and so they're staying on the other side of the borders. So I'm curious what their plan's going to be. So we'll see. There's a lot of foreign fighters going into Ukraine. I think that's going to be an issue for Ukraine. You're not seeing, in my opinion, a lot of the foreign fighters that I came across, a lot of good ones with experience, but a lot of them, they're not knowing what they're getting themselves into, and they're doing it for the wrong reasons. A lot of the foreign fighters that went early on, they're well situated, well equipped, know what they're doing. When the invasion started, you saw a lot of influx of foreign fighters. And I met a lot of good ones, but I met a lot of ones that either are running away from issues or, doing it for the wrong reasons, in my opinion. So I'm curious to see what that situation is. And they're just I think they go in seeing news reports of Russia helicopters getting shot down, tanks being blowing up, and oh, cool, I'm going to get that stuff.
They want the adrenaline part of it.
Yeah, no, you're not going to get that stuff.
Yeah.
There's foreign fighters who can't even get boots. If they're lucky enough to get a gun, maybe I've heard reports and been told they got 10 rounds of ammo and that's it. Or they have to share guns. You get it here and
Your turn. Okay, wait, my turn.
Yeah, so there is a big issue, I think, right now for foreigners getting military equipment, and is not as organized as you think. You can bounce around. If I signed up, I can go bounce around to wherever I want.
To?
Yeah.
Well, it's to kind of, I guess, digress a little bit on it. It's when we had talked before you left, we were talking about things like logistics on what it's like for you being there, and how you, with your tools and what you need with your gear, and and something like this, are there hotels available? You have power, you can go charge batteries and
Yeah.
keep downloading,
The
when
crazy was how good the phone internet was. I was
We're a little sensitive to that issue here right now today, actually.
yeah, parts of Ukraine better than I got in
Yeah.
Wimberley.
Yeah.
Like
Which is where we broadcast from, Wimberley, Texas, which
Yeah.
is about 40 miles outside of Austin,
so
in the country, with the cows.
so phone service and internet was really good. And that's why you're able to this reporting is so interesting, is because you had journalists sending out material very quickly. Again, a lot of journalists weren't able to go in bed with the Ukrainian military because, one, it's insanely dangerous. You can get airstriked at any moment. And so a lot of times when something happens, whether Russia bombed something or then the journalists can go after whatever that incident is happening, but still very dangerous. Okay, repeat your question again, Rodney.
Well, it was just wondering, your logistics and how you, keep your gear up and
Yeah, so phone
keeping
service,
batteries charged.
Yeah.
And
So power was no problem. Hotels, even in a lot of areas, were still going, which was great because a lot of journalists, that's kind of, you need some kind of shelter and food and internet. That's what you
Maybe
need.
shower.
Maybe that's the last. So very different in other places though. In some of the really hard hit areas, obviously it's whatever you can get. Mariupol, people were their only water was just puddles of water and stuff like that. So, and I don't know any more journalists. There's no journalists in those areas other than civilian journalists. But for the most part, yeah, I couldn't believe the internet on your phone still working. I just assumed that would just be completely knocked out. And then food was really not an issue. The issue was driving and gasoline, because gas was the first day invasion, everyone was running out. So transportation and moving around the country was definitely I did not think that was going to be that big of an issue, just because you never know what checkpoints you're going to run into, whether it's official Ukrainian checkpoint, which that's the one you want get it, or you're driving in the middle of the night and it's just drunk assholes who have guns and they're we made a checkpoint and we're going to steal your shit.
really,
Oh yeah, that was big. That happened to a few journalists that I know. They were driving through the night, right into a checkpoint, and it was just drunk assholes with AK-47s and saying we're Ukrainian checkpoint, and they stole their shit and made them turn around, go back.
wow.
So that was a big issue. But I kept it light on this one. I would have my gear in Poland, and then if I were to go in Ukraine, it was just a backpack and my camera bag, and I stayed in my safety gear, so my vest and medical pack and my helmet. So I kept it as light as possible, went in there enough for 7 or 8 days, and then so I made 3 or 4 trips into Ukraine, came back to Poland, made stay for a week or so, get the stories, and then get out. So, but I know journalists who were in Kyiv for a long time, staying in hotels, and for food, at least in those areas, never heard a problem with it. Food and medical supplies were a real issue going towards really on the western side, close to the Russian border, where those areas are insanely hard to get to. So those are the main issues.
Yeah. And what the other thing we talk about, when we were talking about this, and you're it's probably not going to happen. Russia's not that stupid. And of course it happens, but you said that if it was going to happen, they were going to wait until the weather got crappy so they could cut off power, and then these people are freezing. What were the conditions? It was
really cold. I don't think it even got cold enough I don't think it was a winter like, it was cold. To me, it was freaking freezing. But to them, they're like, no, it could get a lot colder. And I don't think, like, they kept using the main roads. Like, they weren't even trying to go off-road. So if you're on the main road, you have such a high chance of getting hit by airstrike artillery. Like, you're very out in the open. So I think they really just missed. I just thought they could just bully their way in, and maybe they thought the Ukrainians military would lay down their arms and run away. I really think that was probably they really thought that was going to happen. But one thing I'm sure is, like, Putin is very unpredictable. So it's like, it's hard for me now because he invaded Ukraine. It's really hard for me now to, like, really predict what he's going to do, because I thought there was no way he was going to do this. Even, like, people who I really know and spend more time in that country and have really good connections, like, they didn't think he was actually going to do this.
You know, the other thing we obviously hear so much about is Zelensky.
Mm-hmm.
What's the word on the ground with the Ukrainians? Is he as much of a hero as he seems to be to us?
Yeah.
Yeah, he as far as, like, Ukrainians go, like, they have a really big respect for him. They think he's doing a good job. Is there political sides that disagree with him? For sure. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, yeah, he's seen as a hero. He's seen as a celebrity, you know, especially outside of Ukraine. He still, you know, Ukrainians will still say he's still a politician. Like, you know, I think politician is, especially during the 2016 election, politician has become really bad. So I think for the most part, most of the Ukrainian people, you know, are united with him, and they see that he's doing everything he can to help stop Russia. But definitely he's taken this celebrity status outside of Ukraine too. That's it's crazy. I mean, they're for sure going to make a movie about this, right? Like, there's no way.
Why don't you make that movie?
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
you even had, like, Sean Penn there, and he was interviewing.
He always shows up.
Yeah. So he's I mean, he's there with his family still. I mean, Russia could easily use a hypersonic missile and end it. 100%. And for whatever reason, they don't want to do that. And yeah, Ukrainian has capabilities to maybe stop that, but not like a hypersonic, you know, new age type of tactical weapons that Russia for sure has. And they've been pretty conservative on that front. They haven't really used their really new stuff. So Zelensky is very brave, because if Putin wanted to, he can use his new capabilities, and Zelensky's there with his family.
Yeah.
So he's very brave at doing that, and he's very smart. He's calculating, like, no, I don't think Putin. It's a very interesting, like, mind games, right? So, so we'll see. I think it's a bad idea now for Russia to take him out.
Mm-hmm. Because he is so popular. And
Yep.
Yeah.
So I think that's not going to be a part of their strategy. But again, like, I thought I had a good sense of what Putin was not going to invade Ukraine, but since he did, now I'm like, I really, like,
He's a real wild
I'm just
card.
guessing.
Yeah.
I'm just guessing based off what Russia's strategy is doing on the ground. And it seems like they're trying to, like, just do, like, kind of like a stall.
You know, you mentioned family and Zelensky's family. You live here in Wimberley, beautiful Wimberley. It's an absolutely incredible spring day here, and the birds are driving us a little crazy, and the cows. I hope some of this comes through on our recording. I'm really interested and curious, nosy, as my mother would call it. You are totally immersed, 110% in that kind of an environment, not just for Ukraine, but all the work you've done over the last, 30 years, I guess. And then you come back to this idyllic little peaceful place that's so quiet. What is that like for you?
Yeah, for me, it really is a polar opposite of what you do, but I think I like the peace and quiet and lets my head rest. And I think the biggest thing for me adjusting, because once you go to those type of places, like your brain is on, like you're looking for every time you're in a situation, I'm looking for, okay, if this scenario happens, I'm going to go to this building, or if people start scattering, where I'm going to go so I don't get trampled, or is this taxi have like, it's a good taxi and there's actually open the door and the door actually opens, like if there's no door handle. So it's like your brain is just constantly on of being situational awareness, and on top of like if you're going for a story and making sure like the roads are clear and having everything that you have, and plus on top of like taking a photo, like, so your brain is just going 100 miles an hour every single day. And so when you come here, it's adjusting, dialing that back down is the biggest thing, at least for me, is the biggest thing.
Yeah.
So I found living out here, with less people and less things for me to look at or be situated, I found it very much peaceful for me. So just because you just have, I can be out in the trees and birds and, or when I go to restaurants or go out to public places, it's not like a big city type of place. So for me, I love it,
Rodney, I've thought, and we talked about it, it'd be really good to have his wife with him on this podcast the next time we talk, because you do have a family, and she must be an incredibly strong woman herself, and you have a brand new little baby.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, my wife and I have been together for 7 years, and even before that we were dating, but I was off, traveling. I think like after a second date, I went off to one of the Gaza conflicts, and then came back.
After your second date?
Yeah, something like that.
And there was a third.
What does your boyfriend do?
Don't ask.
And I think the key is like, yeah, she's like very like she could operate life without me, no problem.
Well, that's a
And she
mixed
has.
blessing, isn't it?
That's kind of like my girlfriend.
Yeah,
She'd
actually,
be just fine without me. So I was like,
Yeah. So, and so that like, I've gotten like, I mean, this type of work, you don't really see many people with families. I mean, there definitely are some, but not that many. So I've definitely I've gotten really lucky, and I'm blessed that I met Ashley, and every single trip has always been supportive, and obviously she'll get scared and worried and stuff like that, but she's always just been, hey, how's the trip? How are you doing? It's never like, come back home, I miss you, or it's like, which that would be a normal situation, like any loved one going out and doing that. Like you can't blame them wanting to do that, but it's always, at least for our instance, has always been like very supportive, and she trusts my judgment, and she trusts what I'm doing. Not saying like you can do everything you can prepare for, you could still, something bad could happen, but she's great. And when I come home, it's, life is, we just did a barbecue yesterday and hanging out, and
Well, I loved your comment. We got a text from Dylan a few minutes before he was going to show up, and he said, well, I'm going to be a few minutes late because I have baby duty this morning. And he said, I bet you do, after being gone for
definitely has changed with having a kid.
And Rosie is how old now? She's
3 months.
3 months. Wow.
So yeah, that it's crazy how fast they grow, even within a month, picking up their head, and she giggles and laughs, when you see her, and she's been actually an amazing sleeper. Like she goes to bed at 9, wakes up at 7.
Wow.
So yeah, she gets that from me probably. So yeah, I think for me now doing this kind of work, I'm much more risk averse, and and I'm much more like, is it worth, like, is this a story that I know? I have to think it, unfortunately, I have to think it on the business side of things too.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, is this story, one, I know if I do it, I can, make something out of it, or two, I'm going to make sure I have these editors sign off on this work so I can go do it. If you're just going out, I'm not the type of person anymore just to go out and
See what happens.
Yeah. I've done that. So,
Well, you ready to tone it down a little bit and just go to Kenya and do some stuff with elephants?
Or the crocodiles with Rodney, or what? Killer whales, I think, right?
yeah, I would. What's crazy is like my portfolio is that, and even though it's still like it's not that much difference than what you do. It's just, there's differences, but you're still taking a photo and you're telling a story. And some people get kind of confused of like, you get what you do, you get branded for that certain thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, no, I can go shoot a commercial for Walmart if I wanted to. It's just different environment. And it would be the same as like, do I think someone who's been in the corporate commercial world come do what I do? Yeah, you just have to be smart and have the right mentality. But as far as like taking that capability, taking a photo or whatever that is, it's just a different style of doing it.
Yeah, I remember when I first got into photography, and that's all you heard was pick one thing. Don't do everything because you won't be taken seriously. And I was like, but I like doing everything.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
And
it's
so,
worked out pretty well for you, Rodney.
Oh yeah, but it is funny how music ended up being my main focus, and I've been shooting music for 20 years, and I got seriously into my nature photography 5-6 years ago, and that is what I'm known for now. It's like my music stuff, I did it for 20 years, and that just doesn't even exist anymore. It doesn't seem like everybody knows me.
I'm constantly battling that.
Yeah, and I love doing it all, but I'm known as the nature guy now.
Yeah, I've gotten into most recently like the food scene in Texas, mostly like the South American style type of cooking that are in the hill country, and we'll do like whole animal cooks and stuff like that. I love, like, cooking has always been like something that I love food, and I love cooking, especially like Latin style, anything on an open flame. Doesn't matter where.
I got a cookbook I need to give you.
Yeah, okay.
Wait, you burn it up already?
And there's a big scene of that kind of style cooking in Texas, especially in Central Texas.
And I learned that from you.
Yeah.
From some of our previous conversations.
Met a lot of great guys. Like in Boerne, Texas, this guy has like one of the biggest chimichurri dry rub, and you just put olive oil, and he's in Boerne, and he comes out here, and they did a cookout Treaty Oaks, and I came just to help and take some photos, and so but yeah, like I like doing a little bit of everything, but yeah, it's very much of I get branded for this style of stuff. So I always tell people, it's like, diverse your portfolio, try a little bit of everything, but whatever you do, you be ready to, like, you're going to have to, like, for whatever reason, people just assumed you're that person. So
Well, go ahead.
I have one other question that I wanted to ask earlier, but I got away from it.
Sure.
But when you're out there, because again, I'm relating what you're doing to what I do, and if I'm say I'm in Cuba, and there most of the photography there, it's street photography and people, and most people are very open to it. The kids and the older people love it. The teenagers, 20s, they're kind of get away from me. And you occasionally have those moments where they get pretty nasty about it. It's like, get your so in a situation like this where it's really sensitive, you got people that are literally fleeing for their lives, and you're trying to photograph this. Are they even aware that you're there, or do they see that he's bringing awareness to what we're going through, or what do you encounter with?
Yeah, I'm very sensitive to that stuff. Like there's been multiple chances where I probably should have taken that photo, and I'm just like, no, no way. Or taking that video during like really chaotic times, people don't really notice, but I saw this, they were at the train station, Lviv. There was a train apparently coming in from Mariupol, which is like one of the hardest hitting areas, very sad areas of Ukraine. And there was like tons of journalists waiting for this train coming in at the train station. And this train coming in, and there's people getting out, and you just saw tons of reporters just like going in. And I was like, no, I don't want to do. You have like 1,000 cameras, and it turned out
that guy, huh?
Yeah, and it turned out the train was not even from Mariupol. It was just another train from some other area of Ukraine. So you saw all these journalists but so they want to get that like really sad type of story. And so for me, I've always just been operated by myself with locals and try to steer away from anything that's like really breaking news. So, but yeah, you just kind of have to play it by ear. Usually, the typical tilt your camera up point, and they either give you a thumbs up, or down. But so it's two situations. If something crazy, chaotic is happening, they really don't even notice. And the other one is, I usually tend to try to like ask permission what they're going to do. So,
one more thing you have to put into that algorithm, everything that's going on around you. Do I take the photograph? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. For sure. Yeah, I've definitely gotten more on the like making sure like they're okay with me doing it versus but again, it's still like you kind of have to see, unfortunately, you have to see on the business side. You have editors and you got to pay the bills and stuff like that. So that's just that's part of the job kind of thing.
The elephants don't care.
Yeah. Do you know that, Rodney? No, we know more about elephants now. They have feelings. Well, I think our time is coming to a close for this particular episode.
For sure.
The good news is, the grateful news is that you're back, and that we've had this wonderful opportunity to have a conversation, the first of many. And I know it'll be the first of many because Dylan has also joined our well-paid staff on Passports and Poets as our video editor and producer. So we're really grateful to have that kind of access to you, and we'll learn a lot from you, and we certainly will hear more stories from you. I hope.
Absolutely. Again, like I like doing other stuff, and I don't necessarily always, being branded for that type of work. Like, no, I like normal things.
Well, are we normal, Rodney? That's still up for debate, isn't it?
That's an insult.
And while we're thanking people, we also want to thank our long-term producer, Brock Glenn Thomas, who has helped us from the very beginning. Rodney, we've been doing this almost 2 years now.
It's hard to believe, isn't it?
It's just hard to believe, yeah. But it's really been quite a journey when you talk about...
We went through a whole pandemic with this.
Yeah, that's how we started. How else would we have had the time? We also want to thank Rupert Neve Design, who was so gracious in getting us started with some of our equipment here. We really appreciate that. We want to thank Donovan Frankenreiter, who has provided our intro and our outro music. We also want to thank Wimberley Valley Radio, our hometown radio station, KWVH 93.4, who rebroadcasts our podcast episodes on Wednesdays Central Time from 3 to 4, and also have them in the archives. And of yesterday, we had a new episode with, it's not Sir Ian, it's Dr. Ian Douglas Hamilton with Save the Elephants.
It's Sir in my world.
We always call him Sir. And most of all, we want to thank you, our listeners, for sharing in these conversations with us. So regardless of where you find your podcasts and how you're listening to this, if you enjoyed it, let us know. That's how we know that we have some conversations that are more than just our interest, although that's our first priority, isn't it, Rodney?
Yeah, and if you didn't enjoy it, lie to us.
So again, Dylan, thank you so much for joining us on this episode, and until next time.